Pizza Prince, my uncle mocked me. I smiled. 25 minutes later, my cousin's fiancée went pale, showed him her phone, and he hissed, "That can't be him." I'll never forget how my uncle laughed that night, as if he'd just delivered the best punchline ever. "Still delivering pizzas," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, his voice full of mock pity. Then he said, "Well, I guess someone's gotta do it." A few people laughed along with him, not sure if they were supposed to. I just smiled, keeping my hands in my pockets and playing it cool as I always do. But something sharp was twisting in my chest. Not embarrassment, not shame, but the deep, familiar sting of being underestimated. Again, my name is Ethan Parker. I'm 29. And yes, for a while I did deliver pizzas. But that's not the entire story. Not even close. Let me rewind a little because the truth doesn't hit as hard unless you have the whole picture. I grew up in a very loud and opinionated family. You know the type. Everyone has an opinion on what you should be doing and how you should live, and they'll share it whether you ask or not, especially at family gatherings. We're not talking about cozy gatherings with board games and pie. I am referring to sharp elbows, bragging rights, and subtle power plays disguised as concern. It's always been like this. My father, before he died, used to call it competitive kindness, as in, "Oh, we love you, but just so you know, we're doing better than you." After his death, things changed. My mother, bless her, tried to maintain the peace. But without Dad's calming presence, I began to feel like an outsider, particularly around Uncle Victor Callahan. He's my father's younger brother, the type of guy who peaked in his mid-30s and hasn't stopped talking about it. He ran a small chain of auto shops and pretended to be Mark Cuban. His children, my cousins, attended state schools, but you'd think they were Ivy League based on how he brags. Family barbecues were essentially his personal TED Talks. Then there's my cousin Logan Pierce, Uncle Victor Callahan's golden boy. Tall, smug with perfectly gelled hair. He's 31 and works for a mid-tier insurance company, but you'd think he's a Wall Street wolf. We were close as kids until he realized he could get ahead by stepping on others rather than helping them. He's the type of guy who will fake a smile while pocketing your wallet. So, when Logan Pierce announced that he was engaged and that there would be an engagement party at Uncle Victor Callahan's house, I almost refused to go. But my mother persuaded me. She said it would be very important to her. She said she didn't want people to think I was off doing who knows what. I understood what she meant. She didn't want them to speculate because that was the point. I had been relatively quiet over the last 3 years. Low profile, rarely posting online and skipping events. And yes, I allowed them to believe whatever they wanted. I was still delivering pizza, I hadn't found my way yet, and I was coasting through life. I parked a few houses down that night to avoid the long line of luxury SUVs that had formed in Uncle Victor Callahan's driveway. I walked in wearing a clean, simple button-up and jeans. Nothing special, just enough to pass. The place was packed. String lights in the backyard, expensive catered finger foods, and jazz played through a Bluetooth speaker. It reeked of forced elegance. Of course, Uncle Victor Callahan was hanging out near the grill, beer in hand, barking jokes like a third-rate stand-up comedian. He spotted me before I even reached the patio. "Ethan," he called out loudly and theatrically. "Hello, look who showed up. Everyone, make way for the Pizza Prince." Several heads turned, some polite laughter. My jaw tightened, but I smiled. "Good to see you too, Uncle Victor Callahan," I said, shaking his hand. He grinned, leaned in, and said under his breath, "Hope you brought coupons." He then let out another loud laugh, as if we were both in on the joke. But we were not. Not even close. The truth is, I could have ended it right there. I could have said something to shut it down, but I didn't. I've learned that sometimes the best revenge is quiet. It is quiet. It is patient. And it waits for the appropriate moment. So I smiled. That calm, practiced smile conceals everything underneath. I mingled. Greeted a few relatives, kissed Mom on the cheek and told her everything was fine. The truth was, I was simmering. Not due to the insult. Honestly, I'd heard worse, but it reminded me of how little they truly knew me. And that is when it happened. Logan Pierce and his fiancée emerged from the house approximately 25 minutes later. She was attractive, poised, and a little stiff, as if she had memorized everything she needed to say before walking in. Her name was Madeline Hart. She wore a champagne-colored dress and jewelry that you buy just to say you own it. She smiled at the crowd as they clapped and cheered, but when her eyes met mine, everything changed. Time seemed to pause. Her expression dropped, not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. Her smile twitched. Her grip on Logan Pierce's arm abruptly loosened, Her pupils darted back to me, narrowing slightly, before she took out her phone. She tapped something in and then stared at the screen. Her face turned pale. She nudged Logan Pierce and showed him the screen. He blinked, frowned, looked at me, returned to the phone, and then looked at me again. The music kept playing. People continued to talk, but something in the air shifted, like a storm cloud that no one could see yet. I took a sip of my drink and leaned against the patio railing, watching and waiting, because I knew exactly what she had Googled and what would happen next. Despite the fact that no one was speaking, you could feel the tension ripple across the backyard like a silent wave. Not directly, but the glances began, as did minor posture changes. Logan Pierce kept looking at me with narrowed eyes, as if he was trying to fit me into a puzzle that no longer made sense. I didn't move. I just watched. Waited. Madeline Hart whispered something to him before excused herself and retreated inside the house. Logan Pierce looked stunned for a moment before following, not even trying to hide it. A few people noticed, including Uncle Victor Callahan, and tilted their heads in confusion. He muttered something to one of his buddies, and they laughed again, most likely making another joke at my expense. But the atmosphere was changing. Still, I didn't say anything. Simply let it all simmer. Something like that. Someone going pale, whispering, and walking away as if they'd seen a ghost, would normally arouse curiosity, if not concern, but not in this family. No one asked how I was doing, what I had been up to, or if I was all right. Instead, they simply resumed their program, making small talk as if I were a supporting character in someone else's highlight reel. I went inside a few minutes later to get a drink. That's when I noticed Logan Pierce and Madeline Hart huddled in the hallway near the guest bathroom. Logan Pierce's face had returned to the same expression of disbelief she had worn earlier. His voice was low, but I heard the end of a sentence as I walked by. That cannot be him. He was delivering. He delivers pizzas, for God's sake. Madeline Hart simply shook her head. It's him, she explained. It's definitely him. I continued walking as if I hadn't heard anything, my heart pounding hard but my face calm, cool and collected. Fortunately, the kitchen was empty. I grabbed a soda from the fridge and drank it slowly, breathing in deeply and grounding myself because I knew what was coming. It was not going to be dramatic at first. Nobody was going to scream or throw drinks. That was not how this family operated. No, this was going to be slow, controlled, and manipulative. Death by 1,000 smiles. I did not have to wait long. By the time I got back outside, things had changed. Not loudly, but subtly wrong. People I'd known my entire life were now giving me these curious, slightly forced smiles. The kind of smile you give when you pretend you don't know something shocking. Uncle Victor Callahan was watching me more closely now, as was Logan Pierce's mother, Aunt Caroline Whitmore. She had that fake concerned expression she always used when she wanted to fish for gossip without looking like she was fishing. I leaned against a post near the string lights, watching everything unfold. I was done mingling and playing along. Then Logan Pierce approached. He didn't appear smug anymore. He appeared perplexed and irritated, as if I had duped him in some way and needed to explain myself. "Hey," he said with a tight voice. I raised an eyebrow. "Hey." He looked around and lowered his voice. "So, could you please explain what this is?" He held up his phone. The screen displayed a Forbes article. Not a big deal, just one of those side stories they occasionally run on aspiring entrepreneurs. But my face was there, as was my name and company. That was only the bare bones of the story. I shrugged. "You searched for me on Google. I guess you found out." He seemed irritated. "So what? You've just been sitting on this, making everyone think you're still a broke delivery guy? Letting?" I repeated. I didn't exactly correct anyone, but I never mentioned that I was broke. He laughed quietly, but not amused. "You're unbelievable." "I get that a lot," I replied, taking another sip of soda. "Do you know what this looks like?" He snapped, "as if you were attempting to make us look stupid." "You didn't need my help with that." His jaw tightened. Maddie freaked out. "She said you attended a tech conference with Tim Cook last year." "What?" I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Oh yes. That was fun. The guy is weird in person." "You're messing with me," he growled. "No, Logan, I'm really not." Uncle Victor Callahan then joined the party. "Is everything all right here?" he inquired, stepping between us like a referee. Except he didn't seem concerned. He appeared curious and calculating, as if he had just caught the scent of something juicy and expensive. "Everything's fine," I said before Logan could respond. Uncle Victor Callahan gave me a long look. Heard there's some kind of mix-up going on, he said, smirking. I didn't realize you were the big tech guy now, Ethan. I shrugged. I don't often bring it up. Doesn't really fit with the overall pizza delivery image. He laughed. This time, however, it was not mocking. It was probing. You've been pulling a fast one on us all this time, huh? Nope, I replied calmly. You just never asked. That night should have ended there. Of course it didn't. The story had only just begun to unravel when Madeline Hart and Logan Pierce shared their version of what they'd discovered online, and the rest of the family began digging as well. One cousin discovered an old Bloomberg interview. Another found my name listed as the founder of a startup that had recently been valued in the low 8 figures. And when they saw photos of me at summits in suits, shaking hands with people they'd only seen on television, the mood changed. Suddenly, I wasn't a failure. I was the unknown variable. They weren't sure what to do with me anymore. And that's when the masks finally came off. The next morning, my mother texted me. She claimed Uncle Victor Callahan had called her. He said he wanted to catch up properly and discuss business with me. I laughed and didn't respond. But the calls began. Aunt Caroline Whitmore, my cousin Carter Hayes, and even Logan Pierce, who left a strangely polite voicemail asking if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. I said no to each of them. I assumed that would be the end of it, but they couldn't let it go. A few weeks later I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Logan Pierce and Madeline Hart are dressed formally and do not have a +1. That was strange, but whatever. I hadn't planned on going. I set it aside. 3 days later, I received a handwritten follow-up note from Aunt Caroline Whitmore, which was full of fake sweetness. We'd love to have you there, Ethan. Perhaps you can finally share some of your projects with your family. Everyone is incredibly proud of you. I crumpled and tossed it. Then my mother called again. Her voice was quiet, as if she didn't want to be overheard. Ethan, she asked. Do you know what they're planning? No, and I don't want to. She paused. They've been telling people that you're funding the wedding. I froze. What? They're telling everyone that you offered, that it was your way of showing gratitude to the family, that you want to reconnect. My blood became cold. I hadn't spoken with Logan Pierce since that night. I had not made a single offer. I hadn't even RSVP'd. But they were using me, my name, and my money to elevate their position. That wasn't simply entitled. It was a betrayal. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as Mom continued. And they've been hinting that you're going to speak at the reception, that you're going to give some big speech about family and success and second chances. I hung up. That night I stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying everything in my mind. The lies, the manipulation, the phony kindness, the years of dismissal followed by an unexpected desperation. They had not changed. They just recalculated. And they assumed I'd play along. They believed they could weaponize my success, the same success they mocked. When I was broke, tired, and delivering pizzas in the rain, they believed they could once again exert control over me. That's when I made my decision. Not out of spite or pride, but because some people learn the hard way. I started making calls. I didn't get much sleep that night. Not because I was angry, although I was, but because something deeper within me had changed. That moment, when my mother told me they were using my name to fund their image, broke something. Not in a dramatic fall to the floor, but rather in a quiet shattering. A realization that I had been avoiding for years. I'd never felt a part of this family. At least not in the manner they claimed. I believe deep down I always knew. I just kept hoping things would get better over time. That if I worked hard enough and succeeded big enough, they'd eventually notice me. Not as an underachieving child whose father died too young. Not as the pizza guy. Not as a cautionary tale. Just like Ethan and myself. But that moment, hearing they'd created a whole narrative around me without my knowledge for their own gain, cut through it all. There was no more hoping or waiting. I needed to make a choice. Play along to keep the peace, or finally step back and take control of the narrative. That's when I began making calls. But before we get there, I need to explain something. See, the part they never knew, or cared to inquire about, was what happened after I reached my lowest point. They knew I'd delivered pizzas a few years ago. Yes, that part was correct. They didn't know why. 3 years after graduating from college, I lost everything. I'd gotten a job at a promising fintech startup right out of school. It was not glamorous, but I was confident in the product and the people. I threw myself in. Long nights, no weekends, pouring my heart and soul into something I believed was important. But then the funding dried up, the CEO resigned, investors backed out, and I was out of a job. I tried freelancing, consulting, and took on debt to stay afloat. My savings ran out faster than I expected, and my pride prevented me from calling home or asking for assistance. I didn't want their sympathy, especially Victor's, so I swallowed it and picked up whatever work I could get. Pizza delivery was consistent. It paid just enough and gave me time to think. People always think of those jobs as the bottom of the barrel, but I met some of the most grounded, hard-working people during those shifts. The old guy on late-night runs who always brought extra sauce just in case. The college dropout who could reassemble a motorcycle engine from scratch. The single mother who worked 2 jobs and laughed louder than everyone else on staff. They taught me more about hustle and dignity than a boardroom ever could. During those late-night shifts, I began sketching out ideas, concepts and business models. I get home around 1:30 a.m., crash for a few hours before waking up to work on prototypes. I didn't have much, but I had time and motivation. Eventually, one of those concepts stuck. I built a beta and asked an old professor for advice. He connected me with a former student turned investor. One pitch led to another, and I soon had enough funding to hire a small team. We worked from a friend's basement for 8 months. It was not glamorous, but it was genuine, and it grew. We solved a niche problem in digital authentication, and the word spread faster than we anticipated. A big client signed on, followed by another. Then a venture capital firm came knocking. The rest was a blur. We scaled, were noticed, and raised a round that turned heads. That Forbes article was only a footnote, but it was the first time anyone outside our world saw what we'd accomplished. And throughout the process, every milestone, every breakthrough, I kept my mouth shut about it to my family. I didn't try to hide anything, but I knew they weren't listening, which brings us back to the wedding. By the time the RSVP deadline arrived, I had a plan. Not out of vengeance. At least not for revenge, but because I was sick of pretending I didn't care. I sent my response. Attending. There is no +1, there are no comments, just one word. They intended to use me as a prop. Fine. I'd play along, just not in the way they expected. The month leading up to the wedding was unusually quiet. I didn't receive any more calls, no more texting. They seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the spotlight to turn on. I imagined them rehearsing speeches, telling stories about how close we were, how they always believed in me, and how family helps family. It made me sick. So I went back to those who believed in me. I called my old mentor. I called my co-founders. I even called 4 of my first delivery co-workers, the ones from the pizza place, and explained what was going on. And you know what? They had my back. We brainstormed. We laughed. We even joked about bringing a pizza to the reception just to prove our point. But beneath the humor, there was a quiet sense of solidarity. These were people who had seen me fail and rebuild from the ground up, and they didn't rely on headlines or LinkedIn posts to validate me. They understood the truth. And for the first time in a long time I felt stable. I'd spent years striving for success, believing that it would fill the void left by my father's absence, the constant family jabs, and my mother's quiet disappointment. However, success did not solve the problem. They did. Real ones. The night before the wedding, I flew in and booked a room at a modest hotel across town, rather than the luxury resort they had reserved for their preferred guests. I did not want the welcome basket. I didn't want the pre-wedding brunch. I wanted to walk into that event as myself, not as their pawn. I wore a simple black suit with no tie, no designer labels, just clean lines and quiet confidence. And yes, I brought something else. A small envelope was tucked in my pocket, thick, heavy, and tightly sealed. But we'll get to that later. The ceremony was fine. Boring even. Logan Pierce stood there, grinning as if he had won the lottery. Madeline Hart looked flawless, polished and robotic. The vows were copied and pasted with sincerity. No one tripped. Nobody cried. The photographs were overly posed. It was exactly as expected. The reception was held in a vineyard just outside of the city. Expensive, overly decorated, with white roses and string quartets. Someone would glare at you if you laughed too loudly. I kept to myself for the first hour. Watched. Observed. Uncle Victor Callahan worked the room like a campaign manager, smiling and shaking hands, telling everyone how close our family was. Aunt Caroline Whitmore clanked glasses with strangers and leaned into every photograph as if it were her own. Logan Pierce looked smug, as if he had finally become the man he had always aspired to be, until he saw me. He froze for a second before smiling and moving over. "Ethan," he said, arms open as if we were old friends. I gave him a tight nod. "Logan, I'm glad you could make it," he said. "Really glad," I replied. "I wouldn't miss it." He glanced around nervously. Hey, listen. Just to clear the air. I did not intend for things to get weird after the engagement party. I believe there was some miscommunication. Miscommunication? I echoed. Like telling people I was funding your wedding. His smile wavered. Look, that wasn't me, okay? That was Mom and Dad's attempt to make the family look good. You know how they are. I nodded slowly. You're not mad, right? He asked, his voice low, because we could use a moment like this. It is good optics for both of us. Win-win. That's when I realized. He still didn't understand it. He saw me only as a story to tell. A success to build on. I moved a step closer. Don't worry, Logan, I replied. I've got something special planned. His eyes lit up, believing I had finally given in. Really? Really? And then I walked back to my seat, returning to the envelope in my pocket. Because the best part of starting over is getting to choose who sits at the table and who is cut off. I don't think I've ever seen Logan Pierce look more smug than at his wedding reception. He moved through the crowd like he was the Prince of Monaco, shaking hands and sharing inside jokes with people he barely knew, as if his surname meant anything outside of that vineyard. It was the type of event where no one came to celebrate love. They turned up to be seen. Logan Pierce adored that kind of theater. But that night, I was more than just a guest. I was the unexpected wild card. The envelope in my inside jacket pocket felt heavier by the minute. Not because of its weight, which wasn't light, but because of what it symbolized. Inside were carefully printed documents bound in a crisp band and tucked into a thick paper sleeve with a simple logo. No frills, no drama, but they'd cause both. The best part? I hadn't come alone. That is something no one in my family has ever thought to ask. Who can I trust? For them, trust was a transaction. You trusted people who could give you something. You aligned with those who improved your image. However, for me, trust was not about gaining. It was about the truth. It was about loyalty forged in dark and quiet places. Over coffee at 3 a.m. following a failed pitch. On rainy pizza shifts you lend someone gas money without asking. In that dingy basement startup office we nearly gave up but didn't. Those are who I called. Some of them attended the wedding, despite not wearing tuxedos or being on the guest list. See, when you start from the ground up, you learn how to work in the background. You learn how to move without drawing attention until it's too late. Most importantly, you will learn how to identify leverage, where it hides, how to use it, and when to strike. The weeks leading up to the wedding were not just spent stewing and venting, or coming up with clever one-liners. I spent that time doing what I do best. Research. I didn't go digging for dirt because I wanted revenge. I dug because I needed to know who I was dealing with. I needed to know how deep the rot was. Logan Pierce had secrets. Of course he did. The wedding cost upwards of $82,000, despite Uncle Victor Callahan's claims of keeping it classy but affordable. The venue charged more than most people's annual rent. The dress code was black tie optional, but black tie was considered mandatory. There were signature cocktails named after the couple, live jazz music, a photo booth with a branded neon sign, and imported flowers. All of this should have raised red flags on its own, especially given Logan Pierce's modest salary at the insurance company, but no one in the family questioned it. They simply assumed the money came from me. It was their mistake. They counted on my silence. However, I only speak up when it matters. I learned from a mutual acquaintance who used to work with Logan Pierce at the firm that he'd been floating investment opportunities to coworkers for the past year, telling them he had an inside track with a startup, my startup, and that if they invested now, they'd see returns within 8 months, at the very least. It was not even subtle. He used my name. He showed people my press clippings, screenshots of my LinkedIn, statistics from articles I'd written, and told them he had a direct line to me, that I trusted him, and that we were practically co-founders. The kicker, he'd already made nearly $68,000. It wasn't enough to cover the entire wedding, but it gave him enough leeway to book vendors and pretend he was paying out of pocket. The rest stemmed from quiet promises made to Uncle Victor Callahan's friends. Businessmen who thought they were investing in the next technology unicorn. Men who assumed that if Victor's nephew was in charge, the entire operation must be legitimate. Except for me, no one else blinked twice when they heard the lie. So I gathered receipts and statements, contacted my legal team, and asked them to review the claims. We didn't want to push anything through the courts just yet, but we wanted to be prepared. I even phoned one of the investors. Let us call him Graham Sterling. Graham Sterling was a mid-tier real estate developer with an unusually pleasant demeanor. I expected arrogance, but instead I got a man who sounded genuinely duped. He told me you were prioritizing friends and family investors. Graham Sterling stated that the round was already nearly half full and I needed to act quickly. How much have you given him? $30,000. I cashed out some stocks. I felt a pit forming in my stomach. Do you realize I never authorized any of that? I spoke carefully. There was a prolonged pause. I do now. He wasn't angry, but rather disappointed. And those are the people I can't bear to see hurt. The ones who believe too quickly, trust too deeply, and simply want to be a part of something. That's when I realized I couldn't let this slide. Logan Pierce hadn't simply lied to his family. He lied to people like me, individuals who believed in something greater than themselves. He transformed their hope into leverage and their dreams into a cocktail budget. So I requested favors. Graham Sterling attended the wedding not as a guest, but as a +1 for one of my co-founders, who had RSVP'd at the last minute under a false name. He wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, and brought a file folder. There were copies of everything inside. Statements, emails, and screenshots. Proof. We weren't going to start a war that night, but we were going to lay a landmine. And the envelope in my jacket pocket was not for Logan Pierce. It was for Uncle Victor Callahan. Because, while Logan Pierce was telling lies, Victor was spreading them. He was the one calling around after the engagement party, implying that Ethan is going to set the family up for life. The one informing Aunt Caroline Whitmore that I was working on a family trust. The one who informed his friend group that I had agreed to consult on their businesses as a favor for family. He weaponized my silence, just as Logan Pierce did. So I waited. The reception went on. Speeches were made. Toasts were given. Madeline Hart's father spoke for 25 minutes about love and commitment. Victor delivered a boisterous speech about family legacy and ambition, mentioning twice how proud he was of his nephew, the entrepreneur. I clapped along with everyone else. Logan Pierce then took the microphone. He delivered a brief, rehearsed speech about meeting Madeline Hart, falling in love, and how she transformed his life. There was laughter, a few ahs, and a brief pause that allowed tension to build. Then he said it. And I'd like to express my gratitude to my cousin Ethan, he said, turning to face me. Most of you recognize him as the mastermind behind Signalbox. And let's just say that his support has been incredible. We wouldn't be here without him. The room applauded. I did not. I stood up calmly, quietly, and walked across the room to the head table. Uncle Victor Callahan smiled like a man about to receive a paycheck. I paused beside him and took out the envelope. Slide it across the table. For you, I replied. He blinked. What is this? I leaned in. Proof. Then I turned to walk away. There's no drama. There's no mic drop. There was no shouting. But I could feel eyes following me. Victor opened the envelope. I didn't need to see it. I knew as soon as he read the first page. His face had lost its color. He flipped through the stack quickly, desperate. Logan Pierce leaned over, attempting to read. Victor slapped his hand away. Madeline Hart looked perplexed. Aunt Caroline Whitmore seemed concerned. Graham Sterling watched from across the room, arms folded. And me? I walked outside and breathed in the cool night air. Because revenge isn't always loud. It's the moment they realize the game has ended, and you've already left. The sound of string lights buzzing overhead and champagne glasses clinking behind me faded as I stepped outside into the vineyard's night air. The silence outside was too peaceful for what was happening inside. I stayed outside for a few minutes, just long enough for the envelope to make an impact. I did not need to see the first detonation. That was not the point. I'd already seen how Uncle Victor Callahan reacted when something didn't fit into his story. This time, he wouldn't be able to charm his way out. No backhanded jokes. There was no manipulation. Because this time, I had left nothing to interpretation. The packet I handed him contained more than just vague proof. It was a complete portfolio. Logan Pierce had made each and every fraudulent claim. Every false promise signed in my name. Every lie told by Victor to gain business clout in his own social circle. My attorney even sent me a polite letter in clear professional language. This is not a formal cease and desist order, nor is it a notice of legal action. However, if Mr. Ethan Parker's financial misrepresentation and defamation continue after the date of delivery, or if Mr. Parker is found to have suffered additional reputational damage as a result of Mr. Logan Pierce's false claims, our firm will send you additional legal correspondence. It was elegant, undeniable, irrefutable. By the time I returned inside, I didn't need to say anything. I could see it on their faces. Logan Pierce was pale and sweaty, his arm tightly wrapped around the back of Madeline Hart's chair, which was now visibly leaning away from him. Her parents stood off to the side, whispering, their expressions shifting between confusion and dawning horror. Uncle Victor Callahan sat frozen, flipping through the last few pages repeatedly, hoping something had changed. Nothing had. Graham Sterling, the investor duped by Logan Pierce, approached the table with my co-founder beside him. They introduced themselves calmly and politely. Graham Sterling even smiled as he spoke. "Hello again, Logan," he said. "Funny seeing you here." Logan Pierce stood too quickly, knocking over his glass. "Graham, I can explain." "No need," Graham Sterling replied, raising a hand. "I am not here to argue. I just wanted to let you know that I've started the process of filing a fraud complaint with the SEC, and my lawyers are preparing civil charges. You will hear from them soon. I expect full restitution for the $30,000 I gave you under false pretenses, plus damages." Logan Pierce looked at his father, like a child seeking permission to cry. But Victor was no longer pretending to help. He sat slack-jawed, his empire of smoke and mirrors crumbling in front of him. That's the thing with people like him. They are fine as long as they control the narrative. However, take away their script. They are lost. "Victor," Graham Sterling said, turning toward him. "You vouched for your son. You mentioned that Ethan personally backed the investment. You told my wife over dinner that you were assisting with the payout schedule." Victor opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. "Don't worry," Graham Sterling said. "In addition, you will receive a copy of the filing." Just a formality. The room was silent. There's no music. There is no chatter. Even the waitstaff paused at the edge of the room, as if they were aware they were watching something both delicate and explosive at once. Then I walked up to Logan Pierce. He was sweating now, and his expensive suit did nothing to hide how small he appeared. He opened his mouth, presumably to plead, lie, or spin, but I cut him off with a single raised hand. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding," I said calmly and firmly. "I came here to stop you from ruining other people's lives." "Who?" "You could have simply called me," he stammered. "I did," I responded. "You ignored me. Then you lied about me. Then you tried to profit from me." His gaze shifted to the guests, who were visibly uncomfortable, pretending not to listen, but failing. "And for what?" I asked. "A wedding? A photo op? You used my name and silence to sell a lie to investors. To Madeline Hart? For your own family?" Madeline Hart looked at him. "That is not how someone looks at a man they love. The way someone looks at a broken painting in a gallery and wonders how they could have seen beauty in it." "I didn't mean," he began. "You meant every word," I replied. "You just didn't think I'd speak up." He attempted to take a step toward me, but Madeline Hart rose from her seat and moved between us. She did not even look at him. She turned to face me. "Ethan," she replied quietly. "I had no idea, I swear." "I know," I replied. "I saw it on your face the second you looked me up." She nodded while holding her arms. "We'll talk," she said to herself, rather than to him, before walking away. Not toward her parents or the crowd, but toward the exit. Logan Pierce took a shaky step after her before stopping. Nobody moved to stop him, and no one moved to help. The DJ, unsure what to do, gently resumed the music, but the illusion was shattered. The toasts were finished. The vibe was poisonous. One by one, people began leaving. Some made polite excuses. Others left without a word. A few gave me quiet nods of understanding as they passed, though no one dared speak to me out loud. Not now. Within 45 minutes, the wedding reception was down to a few awkward relatives and Uncle Victor Callahan, now sitting at the corner table, alone, defeated, staring into his untouched glass of whiskey. I walked by him once more, pausing just long enough for him to register me. "You brought this on yourself," I said. "I kept my distance for years. You just wouldn't leave well enough alone. You humiliated us," he said bitterly, voice low. "No," I replied. "You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." I didn't wait for a response. There wasn't going to be one. The next week, things moved quickly. Logan Pierce was placed on leave at his insurance firm the day after the wedding. By Friday, he was fired. Turns out, someone had leaked the wedding incident to the company's legal team. Between the active fraud investigation and the potential lawsuit from Graham Sterling, they couldn't afford to keep him. His employee bio vanished from the website overnight. Madeline Hart moved out of their shared apartment by the end of the month. I didn't talk to her again after the wedding, but I got a thank you card in the mail a few weeks later. There was a simple note inside. "Thank you for showing me the truth. I almost built my future on a lie." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything else to say. As for Uncle Victor Callahan, his reputation took the biggest hit of all. Turns out the investors he'd been bragging to were less than thrilled when they found out his entrepreneur nephew wasn't backing anything. At least 2 of them pulled out of joint ventures with him within the month. Rumors started to swirl. His name became mud in their business circles. One of his long-running partnerships quietly dissolved. His auto shop franchise still standing, but not untouched. People talk. Customers listen. The last I heard, he downsized significantly. My mom asked me if I regretted any of it. Not in a judgmental way, just a mother's voice, weary and concerned. I told her the truth. I regret letting it go on for so long. She didn't press after that. I think in her heart, she knew it had been a long time coming. Life moved on. My company continued to grow. We landed a government contract 8 months later that nearly tripled our valuation. I hired more people, expanded offices, took care of the team who'd been there since day one. The ones who stood with me when I had nothing but ideas and a mountain of unpaid bills. And I never delivered another pizza again. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about those years. The long shifts. The stares from people who thought they had me figured out. The silence from the people who were supposed to lift me up. And how I survived all of it. Not by shouting. Not by proving myself over and over again. But by staying quiet until I didn't. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't scream. It's smile while they underestimate you, and then watch their whole house of cards come crashing down.